Since you're human, you're bound to sometimes have an opinion. And what we're going to do in the next few weeks is to learn basically how to express that opinion and to learn how to do that in an opinion piece, that is to say in a written form, in a written format. How do you express your opinion? And this very first week, I want to concentrate on something which is maybe a bit philosophical, but which is actually really essential. Something about your attitude when writing such an opinion piece. Because I'm convinced when this attitude is right, the opinion piece will become much better and much more acceptable for everybody and more effective for everybody. And this is the following point. You're now doing a university program. So you're following an academic education. It means you're going to be an academic whether you want to or not. Whether you're going to work in academia or outside of academia, you're going to have this title. And there's always going to be some relation between that title, between that academic background and the opinion piece you're writing. Having such an academic background will give you some extra responsibilities, will give you the responsibility of writing a better opinion piece. And for this, it's very important to understand what is the relation between science and opinion. A philosophical distinction is important, namely the distinction between is and ought, as it's called, by David Hume, the British philosopher. So we as scholars, we as scientists, what we know is hopefully a little bit about things about how the world really is. What are the facts about the world? What insights do we have about the factual state of the world? But that doesn't immediately give us authority to say how the world ought to be. How should the world be? That is not just dependent on facts. That's not just dependent on how the world is. It's also dependent on something else, namely our values. So what do we think is important in life? What do we think is important in the world? And there's no way to prove scientifically that one way of viewing that is better than the other way. Is it better to be righteous or to be mean? Well, even that, so it seems completely obvious. It's obvious from a human perspective, but you cannot prove it scientifically that one is better than the other, because how could you prove that, right? So how good or bad are not like that. And good or bad are always central in opinion pieces. Now that means that, so you're giving an opinion, you're talking about how the world ought to be, and your responsibility is to distinguish these two things, to distinguish your own values or the values you're expressing in your piece from the facts. You will always have a responsibility for having the facts right and also for being logical, being clear, things like that. But another responsibility is to make completely clear always that these are your values. These are the values you're basing yourself on. And people might not agree with them, and then they're not necessarily stupid. That makes it difficult. That makes it extremely difficult, because it's very easy to say, I'm a MA, I'm a doctor, I'm a professor, so I know how the world is, and therefore I also know how it should be. No, you don't. It depends very much on your values. Remember that. And of these values, I would say there are three different types. The first are your private values. Sometimes in the future, there might be some kind of issue in the public arena where you feel strongly about. You feel that something needs to be changed here. And you feel this as a private person. You're going to have an academic degree, you're going to be an academic, but you're hopefully also going to be a responsible citizen who has opinions about whatever. You have an opinion about some parking lot in the village where you live. Should it be cleaned up or not, something like that. But whether or not that should be the case depends on your values. But you will always, from now on, because of your academic degree, have the responsibility of still arguing in a clear and transparent and logically transparent way. Even if you're writing about a piece like that, even if parking lots are not part of your academic expertise. A second set of values, very important as well, are the values which are inherent to science. Now that seems a bit strange that I say this, because it seems to contradict what I said before, that science is all about facts and not necessarily about values. Values are outside of science. That is true, let's say, for the scientific method. It's not necessarily true for science as an organization, science as a movement, science as a group of people practicing science. Our university and universities in general also have a set of values, which is about collaboration, which is about finding the truth, which is about being open, etc. These are values which are inherent to science as a group of people, and as long as you feel that you are part of that group of people, you have a responsibility towards those particular values. And thirdly, sometimes, in some cases, also the values of your particular employer are going to be important, whether or not that is, again, an academic institution or some company, whatever. They might ask you to write a so-called position paper for them. There's going to be some kind of issue where this organization, where your employer has an opinion, wants to express it, and wants to base it on facts and factual matter. In this case, it's important to think about and realize what are the differences and similarities between the values of your employer, your own private values, hopefully they're not too far apart, and also the values inherent to science. Again, hopefully they're not too far apart. You have to behave responsibly in a moral way, and that means you have to be clear and sure about what are all these three different values whenever you write. Because the values of your employer are particularly important if you write for them, but they can also be important when you just write this opinion piece about the parking lot in your village, because your employer might not necessarily agree with that. Still, then you have to weigh all these different values. Okay, as I said, this is a philosophical introduction to something which is otherwise going to be very practical, much more practical. We're going to end up writing a real opinion piece. But it's extremely important to realize this, to have this attitude right at the outset. And for this reason, the homework assignment for this week is going to be to find 2 opinion pieces. In the next 4 weeks, this is always going to be the basis for the assignment, which is to say, every week you have to find 2 new opinion pieces. In a newspaper, in a magazine, on a website, is not so important. What is important is that they're clearly expressing an opinion. They should be about 500, 600 words long, and you should analyze them. And this first week we're going to analyze them on the basis of this value fact is ought distinction. So this first time I'm asking you to analyze both of these pieces, and altogether you should write some 200, 300 words, so not very long, but analyze both of them, see which values are defended. Do you believe these are the private values of the author, or the values of their company, or general values of science? And what are those values specifically, more precisely? And secondly, which facts are used to support the analysis? See you next week.